Hello and welcome to this travel awareness briefing. My name is Nigel Basham from Special Contingency Risks Limited, and over the next approximately 1 hour we're going to look at the current threats. We're going to refer to some previous incidents from the perspective of looking lessons learned, and we are also going to look at some practical measures for traveling more safely. So you could be forgiven for thinking we are living in an increasingly dangerous world. We are facing a number of threats, both natural disasters, diseases, and other threats coming from political or conflict regions, including war, riots, and the issues caused by a widening wealth gap. Interestingly, whenever there is a natural challenge like a hurricane or a natural disaster, tornado, tsunami, what tends to happen is the law enforcement and military in the country tend to get tied up in dealing with that. There are large exodus of people leaving those areas, and that can create a void for criminals to work in. In the same way, where there are areas suffering from disease or epidemic, there is often gaps created where criminals will exploit those gaps. And so we need to understand where the risks lie. And just because somewhere has been hit by a hurricane doesn't mean to say that the criminal challenges, the criminal dangers will increase too. So before we move into the main presentation, I think we need to, first of all, understand that there is no such thing as a dangerous person. People hiding in plain sight who can, on the surface, look quite normal. On the screen right now, you've got Anders Breivik, the extreme right-wing terrorist in Norway who killed a large number of people. And we've got a number of other individuals who have gone on to commit acts of murder, active shooter incidents, bombings. Here on the screen now we've got the aftermath of the bombing in the hotel in Mali, and quite frankly it's interesting to look at belief systems under these circumstances, because in the people committing these acts, in their belief, they are potentially patriots. They may be thinking of themselves as warriors. We may badge them as terrorists, but ultimately I think we need to try and understand their values and beliefs if we're going to have any hope of trying to work out why they do things, and more importantly, where they might do things next. They are certainly, in many cases, confused, but that doesn't make them any less dangerous. In the recent aftermath of Paris and in Brussels, it's underlined the fact that even places that have been considered to be traditionally safe are in fact no longer so. So do we really understand someone's values and beliefs? We don't have to agree with them, but I think the importance should never be lost of trying to understand what people believe in, what is driving them, and what are they trying to achieve. We believe it is invaluable to build a travel web library. On the screen are a number of organizations who currently supply information around the world. Some of them are private sector companies, and others are government-run agencies. And you'll see on the screen right now, you'll see International SOS amongst them, also Homeland Security. We also have the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the UK. And then there are sites like TripAdvisor and Lonely Planet who also provide good, useful information. Cannot overstate the importance of keeping your own travel web library. When people that you work with travel, when they come back, lessons learned, things they would have done differently can save a huge amount of, at very least, difficulties in becoming maybe ill, but certainly from a staying safe perspective, a travel web library, both populated from external sources and also your own internal lessons learned, is absolutely invaluable. Let's have a look at the kidnapping threats in the top 10 countries in the world at the moment. There won't be a huge amount of surprise for many of you watching this. For example, in Mexico, we are globally aware of at least 1,500 incidents a year. The actual number is considerably higher in reality, probably, although we don't have any official figures. There are a number of reasons for this, but mainly there is often a lack of confidence in law enforcement's ability to effectively deal with these things, so we may never know the true numbers. Other countries of note, you'll see Syria there, providing us with new challenges and a level of terrorism and brutality never seen before. We also, if you'll notice, number 5, the Philippines, a group called the Abu Sayyaf group, operating mainly in the southwest of the island, have moved from being driven by criminal elements to being affiliated to the Islamic State group now, and their level of violence and terrorist-related incidents are increasing. I think wherever it is you're going, it's all very well looking at where they sit in the league table, such as the one on the screen, but every country has its own specific methodology. For example, Venezuela, carjacking is particularly important in Venezuela at the moment, and so it's important to look at your travel web library and get more information, not just look at the figures on the screen. When we're looking at kidnapped victims, I think it's also useful to look at the types of victims. You'll see that employees and dependents, their families, make up over half of all the victims concerned. So clearly, a lot of that is driven by complacency. When you live in a country that may be a higher risk than other places in the world, we really need to understand that although it might feel safe, it isn't actually safe. And a compound and what feels like a normality is actually a very dangerous place in reality. Aid workers make up a chunk of that too, because the nature of aid working is often the fact that they have to get very much involved with local people and go to areas which are not necessarily recommended. But returning back to the bulk of those people taken, they are employees of large organizations, and they are with their families or their friends, and it's often caused by complacency, about feeling safe, when in fact it is anything but safe. So when we look at the type of things that are happening, the risk to the people, the mitigation that we need to put in place to help the people traveling, we need to look at crime in two ways. There are opportunist criminals and there are planned criminals. There are a very, very high number of opportunist criminals out there who will look at certain indicators on the spot and decide whether or not that individual is someone worth targeting. So there are things we can do about that. There are things we can do to mitigate that. When we're looking at people's profile and their appearance, I'll talk a bit more in a short while about the online profile that some people have, which may indicate that they are worth money, or that there are reasons for them to be targeted. But quite often people's vulnerability actually increases by the way they dress, the type of jewelry they wear, and their behavior. There are certain things we can't control, like our gender, but there are many things that we can, like not keeping to the same routine, and about being careful where we go. The type of crimes we're facing around the world that we need to look at are things like kidnap. We're looking at people being involved in natural disasters, getting ill. The reality is you're far more likely to become ill than you are to be kidnapped. We do need to look across the whole board. People do get arrested lawfully and unlawfully, and also people do get injured or need to be evacuated. often in an emergency. There are a number of events that we can have some degree of planning and prevention for, and others that we need to look at what happens if you're caught up in one. Let's have a quick look at some events which either have helped terrorists or criminals to learn lessons from, or that we as risk experts and victims have learned lessons for. Going back to 2008, the Mumbai Attack has been fundamentally important to many terrorists who've learned a great deal of lessons. For example, the use of fire as a weapon, the use of the media images. In fact, in the Mumbai Attack, many of the terrorists were being controlled by people who were actually talking to them from Pakistan by phone. Those controllers were watching the events on the world media, and they were instructing the 10 terrorists where to go and what to do. So it was extremely well coordinated. As the event rolled on through hotels and cafes, a hospital and a community center, there are many instances where it was shown that the terrorists didn't know what to do next. And so they had the initial incident planned, but then the rest of it was pretty much made up as they went along. So there were a number of opportunities with the benefit of hindsight where intervention could have been better. The terrorists learned the power of the world media, and the public and the police learned the ability to perhaps intervene in these type of events and change their course through early intervention. Looking more recently, the Sousse Beach attack in Tunisia, where a terrorist concealed a weapon on a beach inside an umbrella and then opened fire. A lone gunman, again as in Mumbai, targeted an area known to be populated by Westerners, a very high profile, a 5-star hotel as in Mumbai again, and in this case, out of 38 people killed, 30 were British. It was later claimed by the Islamic State group, and interestingly, it got such large media coverage that many people missed the fact that on the same day, there were in fact 4 other attacks that same day, all claimed by the Islamic State group. In Bamako in Mali in November 2015, 2 armed gunmen attacked the hotel, again another prominent, high-quality hotel known to be occupied by Westerners. In this case, interestingly, the hotel was attacked on the day of a conference where it was known there'd be a lot of people attending that conference. The attack happened first thing in the morning, and many people were killed from across a number of different backgrounds. Luckily, the special forces were in the town at the time and managed to bring it to an end fairly quickly. Along the way, a large number of hostages were taken. So looking at these 3 events, I think the key thing that jumps out is the venues were very prominent 5-star hotels that were well known to be the favorites of Western travelers and governments. So one of the things that we need to look at is when we choose where we're going to stay, are we looking to stay at the most obvious, iconic, or popular Western hotel in the area? Are there any other choices we could make which may not stand out as the obvious place to attack if you were a terrorist? Recently, around the world, we've seen an increase in what is being known as active shooter incidents. In America and the UK, the governments have put together some advice of what to do and to understand some preventative measures that can be taken in an active shooter incident. In the UK, the response is known as run, hide and tell. In the US, it's known as run, hide and fight. The principle is the same though. If there is an accessible escape path, then try and get away. Run away if you can, and if you can't run away and evacuate the premises, then find somewhere to hide. If we are dealing with someone using a weapon, fighting and confrontation is the very, very last resort. So find a place to hide and make sure that you remain well hidden, that you keep your phone on silent, and that you do not emerge from your hiding place until you're absolutely sure that it's safe to do so. As a very last resort, and only when you are in imminent danger, and you believe that if you don't fight, then you may be killed, then as a very last resort, the American government, Department of Homeland Security, will advise you to fight, but you will be fighting for your life, and the attempt to disrupt them or to disarm them or incapacitate them should not be taken lightly. If that happens, it's about commitment, and it's about not holding back at all. If you're in that position, you really will be fighting for your life, so do not hold back. One of the things we're looking at as well is what happens after the event. Across the Western world, the law enforcement and military response to these incidents is extremely good and very well rehearsed. And the reality is an event like an active shooter type incident will be over fairly quickly. We do need to look at what happens next. Once the perpetrator has been caught or killed, there will obviously be a great many affected people. And so we will be looking at the welfare of those that were caught up in the incident and their families, and we will also be looking at the employer considerations and what your employer needs to do, because there are legal and moral things that they need to consider and next steps to be taken. Let's have a look at some practical tips now for when you are traveling. Really, when we are looking at any country, no matter where it is, and this has been reinforced through the recent attacks in Paris and Brussels, we need to look at the government website. Are there any warnings by the official government website? And what do we know about the country from other sources? Is this a stable country? And who's in charge? Who's in control? Is there an embassy in the country that represents you? If there was a problem, where would you go? If, for example, you are an American or you're a Brit or you are one of those nations that is involved in the fighting in Syria, are you welcome? Are you looked upon purely by your nationality as someone who may not be welcome in that country? And we also need to understand how we're perceived. We may believe in ourselves and we know that we actually come with a peaceful agenda, but others may perceive us as being the enemy. So it's back to values and beliefs, it's back to understanding how other people view us. Is there an ongoing situation with a neighbouring country? And is the situation in this country getting worse? Is it getting better? It's about the research and the practical measures. Where do I go if I get ill? How will I obtain cash safely? So overall, what if? What if this happens? What will I do? These are the things we have some degree of planning, time and control in before we travel. The documentation that we need often causes us problems unnecessarily. most of the countries that we're talking about in this presentation have some kind of visa system, but often that is backed up by the need for letters of invitation, potentially from people who are willing to verify you as being someone of good character. It's really important to understand what is needed, and there are a number of websites that will give you real-life experiences. It isn't always just what's written on the government website. Have a look at some other places, for example, some of the websites we looked at on the earlier screen. We can look at places like Lonely Planet and other sites that can give you the reality of what it's like to be in that country. Vaccinations sometimes are good practice, but often are legal requirements. In the case of yellow fever, for example, you have to prove that you've had that vaccination before they'll let you in the country. We would advise to always take copies of all of your documentation, keep it separate from your main pack. Keep your documentation in a waterproof container and ask yourself, do you actually need to carry sensitive documents? Sometimes those documents, if they're found, will stop you getting into the country or may be misinterpreted as something which you shouldn't have. So it's about taking copies, it's about maintaining the security of the documents, and it's about making sure that if you do need to have certain vaccinations or invitation letters, that you are catering for that before you leave. Be very careful about what you take as well. We would recommend that if you have any association cards or any military identification cards or law enforcement equivalents, that unless you absolutely have to take them, that you should leave them behind. It also, in the case of self-defense or weaponry, what we might consider to be a small pocket knife might actually be illegal in that country. What we consider to be ordinary reading matter might be considered to be explicit literature, might be misinterpreted as pornography. And certain books, and you'll see Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses, may actually create an issue just by having it in your bag if the country you're visiting is one of those that has prohibited the sale of that item. Once again, it's about looking at what you are allowed to take, and it's also about looking at the values and beliefs of that country and understanding how people might interpret what it is that's in your bag. Now, there are a number of countries that we all visit that have particularly unusual cultural restrictions. Again, some of this can be researched in advance, but when it comes to culture and religion, there are a number of sensitivities which should not be overstated. Sometimes cultural sensitivity and awareness, it becomes a very critical component of any risk management. We are aware of certain countries, of course, where alcohol is illegal and the law is strictly enforced. In other countries, in practice, alcohol is often consumed inside Western compounds, but having alcohol in a vehicle can be cause public flogging, can cause imprisonment, and foreigners are not above the law. So penalties for possession of or the trade in alcohol are very, very severe. In certain countries, for example, in Morocco, homosexuality is illegal and is punishable by up to 3 years imprisonment. In some countries, there are specific dress codes. It's extremely important, especially for women, to ensure that their manner of dress meets the standards requirement. It's not necessarily just about wearing a headscarf, for example. It can be that you're not wearing the headscarf properly. Men should wear long trousers and long sleeve shirts. In some countries, cross-dressing, or what might be perceived as cross-dressing, is illegal, as are displays of affection. Holding hands, for example, is illegal in some countries. And also sex outside marriage, regardless of whether you are married in, say, for example, the United States. You might have a number of children with your partner and have been together for decades. In some countries, you will not be allowed to have a hotel room together without first producing a marriage certificate, which will prove that you are lawfully married. So again, we can look at those kind of things in advance, and we can make sure that we are not going to find ourselves embarrassed or worse before we go. Some countries, as I said, have got specific cultural barriers to females. We are aware of women being stopped by passers-by from drawing cash from an ATM because culturally it was not considered to be right for a woman to be able to handle money and draw money from a bank. That was considered to be something that should be done by a man, and the woman in question was being asked by a passerby whether he could get the money out of her account for her. It's about knowing how you will respond to that kind of challenge, and quite clearly not finding yourself in that position where you may be a woman on her own trying to get cash out from an ATM. Not only may you be vulnerable from a robbery perspective, but going to get money out as a group activity may stop some of the challenges happening. In India, we've all read about and heard about some of the attacks on young girls and women, including foreigners. That continues to be a problem. And public transport is often the flashpoint, crowded buses especially. So we just need to be extremely aware of people's values and beliefs, and we need to understand what the religious and legal requirements are. And that can then stop us coming to attention. The photograph on the screen right now shows a woman wearing a long skirt. However, the way in which she's sitting is exposing some of her leg. That can be considered to be a real no-no and cause all sorts of problems. We found that clearly the need to spend money and take money with you often creates us with points of risk. So sometimes you're not allowed to take money into the country and you have to draw it out. So before we go, we need to understand what currencies you need, and if you can take it with you, then do so. We would recommend using a local hotel. You may not get the best rate, but you will be in a much more safe environment using the hotel. Of course, common sense says we don't carry all of our money around with us. And if you are using credit cards, we would highly recommend that you leave some credit cards behind in your home country and only take one or two with you. And then when you are traveling around in that country, if there is a way of splitting those cards up, we would recommend that. If you are unfortunate enough to lose your money or be robbed, then at least they don't get everything. Not having any means of obtaining money in some countries puts you in a great deal of difficulty and creates a vulnerability which doesn't need to happen. Those of us in the security industry carry around with us some basic things with us. In my own case, I will always carry a small flashlight. I always carry a small pocket knife in my main baggage. We'll come back to door wedges in a minute, but that is a very, very important thing to have with you. I always carry a cable lock, the kind of thing that you can hold a bicycle to a lamppost with. Very useful for just securing your bags together. If you're, for example, in an airport and your bags are gathered around your feet, it's easy to be distracted and for someone to pull one of those bags away. If you lock them together, it makes it more difficult. It's very simple to do and can be the difference between you being targeted or somebody else. We can't stop criminals from operating. What we can do is we can divert their attention away from us and push them potentially towards somebody else. I always say have a basic first aid kit with me, and my passport is British. Some countries I do not want to stand in a queue with what is obviously identifiable as a British passport. And so I have my passport in a plain cover. We would recommend everybody does that. So those people casually looking down the line of people waiting to go through immigration are not immediately identifiable because of their passport being on show. In airlines, in airports, once again, these are areas of vulnerability. We would always recommend taking non-stop flights where possible. Every time you stop in an airport and you have some sort of transfer, two things might happen. Number one is your luggage might be taken or go missing or be delayed, and the other thing is you're once again in an airport where you are exposing yourself to vulnerability. There may be delays, but also you're in an unfamiliar environment, and the less you can do that, the better. So if you are in an airport, we recommend that you take a few minutes to understand where the security is, where airside is, and what the procedures are. Some of these things you can look up in advance by looking on the internet or calling the embassy. However, in many cases, you're well advised to take a few minutes when you first arrive. Understand what the security procedure is. Some security procedures can take an hour and a half to get through and need careful planning. And there may be a distinct difference between the security on a domestic flight and an international flight. So get the information as early as you can so you're not surprised. Raise your awareness when you're in these places. Find out where the exits are. Find out where the escape routes are. If something does happen in an airport, when you are running, if you've had the opportunity to decide in advance where you need to run to, it will put you at a distinct advantage over those people that are just panicking and looking around them, not sure where to go next. When you are collected from an airport, this is a really common point of vulnerability. We would advise you to not, when you come out of the airport, just to go to the first person holding a sign with your name on it. Quite often, scammers or would-be kidnappers will look along other people holding legitimate signs, and they will copy a Western name down, and they will stand nearer to the exit than this other person. So you will go to them and almost willingly get in their car, thinking they're there for you. We would recommend that you try in advance to know who it is that's picking you up. Find out their name. Make sure the sign they hold is discreet, doesn't necessarily have words on it. It could have a small symbol, or it could have some numbers on it, something that you know in advance which isn't likely to be copied. And also, when you go to the person that's there to meet you, if you know their name, ask them that question first before you give up your personal details. Ask them where it is they've been told to take you. So it's about, once again, it's about not assuming that they are there for your safety. If they don't know who you are and where they're supposed to be taking you, I would question whether or not you should get into the vehicle with them. When you are satisfied and you're in the vehicle, please ask them to take you direct to your hotel or your office, wherever it is you're going from. Please don't use it as an opportunity to do any sightseeing, draw cash out on the way, or do any variation other than the agreed destination. We're going to look at hotels now, and we are going to have a quick look again at the door wedge situation I mentioned earlier. A door wedge, a rubber door wedge, is a really useful, very cheap thing to have in your bag. a door wedged under your hotel door, because hotel doors tend to open into the room, will prevent the door being forced open easily, can give you valuable minutes to call for help, and can stop just a casual person walking in. As we know, many hotels use electronic keys, and those are not particularly secure. Duplicate keys can be easily made, and other people, such as room service, can get access to your room. We would recommend that you select a room, if possible, between floors 2 and 7. The reason for that is in many countries, fire ladders cannot reach above the 7th floor. So it might be that the 15th or 16th or 20th floor has the best views, but you don't want that view to be of other people being rescued and the ladders not being able to get to you. Floors 2 to 7 at the rear as well. There have been a number of incidents where vehicle-borne explosive devices have been placed at the front of hotels. Bombs have been driven up to the front of hotels and detonated, and those people staying at the front of the hotel are often injured by flying glass. So staying at the rear gives you a number of advantages. Also, many of our escape routes of our fire exits often lead to the rear or the side of the hotel, because that looks less good on the hotel frontage, and so a lot of these exits are placed around the side and the back. Have a think about the spy hole in your room. Often there is a little metal tab which is supposed to stop people looking in. That's missing in many cases. Please don't forget there are ways of looking into spy holes as well as you looking out. Don't let someone have a view into your room. Block that spy hole up with a bit of tissue paper or something. You can always take it out again if you want to look through it. Let's not give people the advantage by letting them peer into our room. Room safes are often not particularly safe. They're often easy to overcome. If anyone's been locked out of their hotel safe, it normally takes a minute for the hotel manager to open using a generic code. And also, when people come into your room, they may be coming to give you your evening meal, room service, or a maid. Let's not give them a view of all of the valuable items that you might have on you. So if you are carrying laptops, cameras, all those kind of things, it takes seconds just to cover them up, so when someone comes into your room by invitation, they're not seeing the valuable things that they might be telling someone else to come and steal later. If you are in a room and there is an attack on the hotel, our recommendation would be in the same as the run, hide and fight. If you are able to escape, then do so. We cannot tell you for every circumstance what the best thing to do would be. If you feel that there is danger outside your hotel room, my personal recommendation is to hide. Is to not give necessarily any sign that you're in the room. So maybe take that sign off the door that says do not disturb. Turn off the television. Put your phone on silent and hide and be silent. I would recommend not answering the room phone, as there have been instances in the past where the room phone has been used to see whether people are in fact occupying their rooms. So find somewhere to hide and be very, very quiet if you're not able to get out of that hotel and get away. Before we leave hotels, one final thing. When you first check into your hotel, it is very, very good practice just to have a walk around the immediate floor to see where the fire exits are. There is normally a little map on the back of your door or nearby, but when you actually go there, the door's locked or it's blocked. So take a short walk. Find out what happens, for example, if you turn right out of your room instead of left to the elevators. Have a look around and familiarize yourself with the area, because in slow time you can work out what it is you would need to do. In an emergency, you don't need to think, you can just do it, because you know it's clear, you know where the door leads to, and you know what your options are. And you give yourself that little advantage that other people might not have. So moving on from hotels into getting around to ground transportation, we would always recommend you use official or hotel taxi companies. They are more expensive, but they will give you a higher level of security. You can usually, in advance, decide how much the taxi is likely to cost. Many will use a meter, but we can have an idea in advance what this is likely to cost. If possible, get someone in a hotel or if you have a guide, someone to write down the address you're going to in the local language. A driver may have basic English, however, when it comes to finding a destination, having it written down in the local language is very useful for them. And before you get in, before you load your bags, make sure they understand where it is you're going. I think it's extremely good practice to take a note of the taxi number, and personally I always let the driver see that I am looking at that. I may even be on the phone saying something out loud, telling somebody, even if they're not actually real on the phone, telling them that I'm getting in a cab and I'm telling them what their taxi number is. When it comes to paying for the taxi, if you have a large amount of cash on you, please don't get that big roll of cash out and count the notes out. Once again, you're exposing your vulnerability. It may not be the taxi driver that's interested in you, but someone else watching you in the cab before you get out. Taking money from a large billfold is putting yourself at unnecessary risk. Some taxis like to try and get you to share a taxi because it makes more money for them, but I would recommend you never get into a taxi where there are other passengers unless you already know them. If you're not happy, be firm and get out of that cab. Most of these things can be looked at before you get in, but if during the journey you become uncomfortable, please don't be afraid to tell the driver to stop and get out of that cab. If you feel something is starting to go wrong, you're probably right. And we don't want to wait to a point where you realize that your feelings were actually correct and now it's too late to do anything about it. So moving on to the next slide, we are looking at general rules. Ground transportation general rules. Let's do our research. Let's look in advance at the best way to travel. Some countries have very, very dangerous roads, and moving around under your own energy, hiring a car, for example, is completely the wrong choice. Many countries have a good, legitimate taxi system, but that is undermined by a number of illegal taxis, people trying to get you to get their ride when you come out of the airport, for example. Something that's happened very recently that I've personally seen are people coming up to you in airports with a laminated sign that says Uber on it, and they will use a story along the lines of they had a booking and that person's failed to turn up, and since they're already in the airport, would you like to go somewhere at a cheaper rate, and they're Uber, so they're genuine. Of course, you know, we can't prove any of that stuff, and using an online service like Uber is the fact that you booked it through the service and gives you some degree of surety about who it is you're being picked up by. We would always recommend to avoid anyone approaching you directly from an airport or any public place. We would look with great caution at people offering to take your luggage for you, to load it in your car. We would always recommend that you look at your bag being put into the boot by the driver, and don't get into that car until you're satisfied that every bag is in the vehicle, and then you get in. Quite often people say jump in the back and then they'll walk off of your bag while you're sitting there waiting, and your view is obscured by the trunk of the car being open and you can't see where they're going. We would always recommend as well that you know where you're going as well. Take a local tourist map with you. Most hotels will give you a copy. Take one in advance if you can. Do not please rely on your phone or GPS or online mapping. Often inaccurate or won't work because of the location you're in. So a paper map is a very useful backup. Also to look around you, local landmarks, statues, certain things which jump out at you, which can be ready reckoners for you when you're trying to navigate yourself around an unfamiliar environment. Look at your own appearance as well. How do you appear to others? In the comical photograph in front of you now, clearly, you know, it's been done for effect. This fella's wearing pink shorts amongst others wearing dark suits. But we need to think about how we are perceived. Do we look like a tourist? Do we look disrespectful? Do we give away our nationality? Are we wearing clothes which are clearly British or clearly American, for example? Are we wearing T-shirts, or are we carrying logos on our clothing which may be offensive? Have we got things written on our T-shirt which may be offensive? We need to think about how we look to the local people. Are we doing our best to integrate, or are we actively raising our profile, our personal profile? Think about what you wear from a watch perspective, jewelry. Do you really need to wear it? If we're operating in a very poor country, what does it say if we're, for example, wearing a watch which is worth thousands of dollars? Is it necessary? We would argue not, and if possible, don't take it with you in the first place. I said earlier, you're more likely to become ill in many countries than you are to be the victim of crime. But we do need to understand where all the challenges are. We are living temporarily, albeit in a different environment, an environment where food hygiene standards may be very much lower, where water may not be drinkable, where we may be susceptible to illness, disease, sunburn, and altitude. For example, in Yemen, in the capital city Sana'a, it's a very elevated place. Altitude sickness is not uncommon in the first few days. It makes you very tired, and this can have a profound effect on your ability to look after yourself and to operate in a way that you would normally do so. Local food, there may be certain standards to local food which may not agree with you, but equally we need to understand how it will look if you flatly refuse to eat any local food, if you're in an environment where respect is important. So once again, in advance, find out what the local dishes are, find out where the dangers might be, and understand what the local culture and the local customs are before we find ourselves in an embarrassing or a dangerous position. Predictability is as big a problem as complacency. They are linked. Being predictable, going for the same run every day, taking the same route to school or to or the office. We need to try and be illogical. If one becomes complacent in a country, if you start to feel safe, you can be forgiven for thinking that there is no need to take the longer route. Why would you put yourself in a position where it's going to take you 10 minutes longer to get to the office? But it's important to be illogical. It's really important as well for your driver to understand that you don't always want to be driven the same route home, and that we don't always need to leave at the same time. Gain an agreement if you're working in a country that you will arrive at different times and you will leave at different times. That unpredictability may save your life. Communication is one of the most fundamentally important things of any travel, wherever you are. Everybody should carry a cellular phone, and if possible a spare. It's very important as well to know who to call. It isn't necessarily the obvious choice. We all know about 911 and 112 and 999 in certain countries, but it doesn't always get you through to the person you think. For example, in California, ringing 911 will often put you through to the highway patrol. In some countries, the emergency services it is a long number. It might change from one town to another and one region to another. It's important to understand who it is you're going to ring and have that number both saved on your phone and also on paper. We would recommend that you don't rely on your SIM card, that you don't rely on your memory, that you have numbers written down on paper separately to your phone as well. If you lose your phone or your SIM card, especially these days, we don't tend to need to remember numbers. We don't want all of our contact advice to be gone if we lose our SIM card or phone. So it's knowing who you should phone and having records of their numbers. Carry a phone card, have some cash set aside which is specifically for making calls, and never be afraid to make that call if you feel unhappy. It's better to call for assistance and be wrong than find out that your feelings of something happening were right and now it's too late. Preparation is about the what-ifs. It's what we spoke about earlier. It's about knowing what you will say if someone was to approach you in the street asking for the time or asking you for change. It's about knowing where your phone is, having it charged. It's knowing where your contact details are and having an alternative. Control the things you can control in advance about how you look, what you wear, how you behave. Know where you are. Know when you feel something's going wrong or about to go wrong, so know when to leave. And know when you need to act and actually take action. So have that emergency plan. If something feels wrong, it usually is. There are no guarantees in life, but if you feel that you're not comfortable, listen to your instincts. If you are unlucky enough to be the victim of a crime, if someone tries to rob you, steal your car, or whatever it is, obey them. If you find yourself in a position where you are the target of someone wanting your property, it's only property. There are ways of giving up your property and creating some space. For example, if someone asks for your wallet, you can take your wallet out nice and slowly. Make sure they see that you're taking your wallet out, and then you can put it down or toss it down somewhere, not directly in front of you. Rather than hand it, pop it on the table or toss it on the floor. And while their attention is distracted, while they stoop to pick it up, run in the opposite direction. Always avoid physical conflict whenever possible. Always run away whenever possible. These are items that can be replaced. So create your distance, keep safe, and obey the criminal rather than get yourself hurt. Let's have a quick look now at medical considerations. You'll notice earlier in the useful gear sign, a basic first aid kit was recommended. I personally also carry what I call a gastro pack with some broad spectrum antibiotics and some electrolytes. If you are unlucky enough to become ill while you're overseas, it's important that you do continue with any drug treatments you were given. However, from one country to another, advice may change. So when you return to your home country, you should always go and see your doctor to make sure that the treatment you've been given is actually the best treatment for you. Keep a very close eye on any changes in your own well-being, for any signs of fever. Write down what's changing, because if you are becoming ill, you may not have an opportunity to remember all the details of when the things started changing. If you do come back, lastly, from a country that has had a well-known issue with perhaps infectious disease or epidemic, and we'll take Ebola as an example, or more recently Zika, be mindful of the perceptions of other people. Although you may know that you are not infectious, and you may know that you are not any harm at all to people, Other people's perception may be different. They may look upon you with nervousness, and if we try and understand what they're thinking, it may be born out of not having the information they need. It might be an educational thing. But please be mindful of the perceptions of others, and be respectful of how they feel. We're going to look towards the end of the presentation. It's important, I think, to look at what happens if you are unlucky enough to be caught up in an attempt or a successful attempt to kidnap you. We would recommend that you are not the person, if you're taken in a group, that you are not the person that makes the situation worse by being a nuisance or being annoying or being confrontational. So even if what the captors are saying is totally abhorrent to you, it may be offensive, they may be making personal remarks about you, don't react. We need to try and avoid confrontation, and we need to try not to stand out. We need to be the person that just is invisible and is neutral. Being too submissive can attract aggression. Being aggressive attracts aggression. Being too submissive can encourage someone to be a bully or make an example of you. But being neutral attracts neutrality. Warmth attracts warmth. If you can maintain positive occasional eye contact, please check yourself if you're staring. What's happening is frightening, but we don't want to be the person that confronts the person that stands out. Do comply. Do not be annoying. Do not make any sudden or aggressive moves. They may be misinterpreted. Try not to raise your voice. Try and be neutral. Do personalize yourself. Do talk about your family if asked. And if you have a medical condition, do raise it. Because once you are being held in captivity, the people that might be able to help you may no longer be with you, and you may just be with guards who don't speak English. So do talk about your needs as early as you can, and do control your behavior. Do take a breath, and do stay as calm as possible given the circumstances. It is very unhelpful to try and negotiate your own way out of a situation. You may be cutting across efforts that are happening outside that you're not aware of. And so we would highly recommend you don't try and negotiate your own way out. Do not discuss your personal wealth, the type of house you live in, or where you go on your vacations. Do not raise your profile. Do not give an impression, whether it be true or not, that you have access to large amounts of money. Let other people do the negotiations for you. Stay neutral. Control your behavior. And let other people who undoubtedly will be making efforts to get you freed, let them take over the negotiations and do it on your behalf. So this is now the end of the presentation. The slide in front of you just summarizing some of the things we've spoken about. Monitor the place you're going. Find out as much as you can about every part of the journey. Make sure everything that you can think about in advance is thought about, right down to transitions and timings. Be very careful about what you've packed. Make sure your luggage is secure. Think about the clothing you're wearing and about how much wealth you need to display. Think about watches and phones, and if you can, use cheaper alternatives. Know your surroundings. Your situational awareness may save your life. Have backup plans, have backup maps, have backup numbers. And ensure other people around you know where you're supposed to be. If you can, have a buddy system where you regularly check in with someone and tell them where you're going to go and where you've been. Always ensure you've got more than one way of communicating with people, and that you know who to call. Special contingency risks, we have an operations center, and there are other organizations that have their own procedures too. 24-hour help is only a phone call away. So, all that remains me to say now is thank you for listening to the presentation. We hope you found it interesting, and travel safe. Thank you.